2 years into this, nice.
Yeah.
Happy Good Friday
Yeah.
and Passover.
Oh, yeah. Mhm.
Double whammy.
Yeah.
Mhm.
We ready to go, Terry? Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Are you ready to go?
Yeah, we're ready to go.
Let's rock.
You want me to call roll call?
Yes.
Director Bragman,
Present.
Director Gibson,
Here.
Director Schmidt,
Here.
and Chair Russell.
Here. Okay. I need a motion to adopt the agenda.
Move approval of the agenda.
Second.
Any public comment on the agenda? Terry, any public comment besides what you already sent us?
Yeah, there are none.
Okay, thank you. Roll
Direct-
call.
Director Bragman,
Here again.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
and Chair Russell.
Aye. Okay, any public comment on items not on the agenda?
There are none.
Okay, making my life easy.
Mhm.
Okay, I need a motion to adopt the minutes of the previous meeting.
Move approval of the minutes for March 11th.
Second.
Second.
Roll call.
Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
and Chair Russell.
Aye. Okay, item 2, consider funding opportunities.
Good morning, board members. This is Matt Segest, the district's grant and legislative program coordinator. This morning, we are bringing to you a request to review and refer to the full board 3 resolutions supporting funding opportunities. I'm going to describe these rather briefly due to the full agenda we have for today's meeting, and because 2 of the resolutions are supporting a project, the Pine Mountain Tunnel tank replacement, which will be discussed at length after my item. The first resolution will be in support of a federal WIFIA loan in the amount of up to $10.8 million to support the Pine Mountain Tunnel tank replacement project.
Wow.
This project, with an estimated total project cost of $21 million, has been selected for federal WIFIA loan financing. In order to move the application forward, the district must pay a $100,000 application fee and complete a full application. The application fee will be applied towards the overall project costs. The WIFIA loan will cover 49% of the project costs, and the district will be required to cover the remaining 51%. Approval of this resolution will authorize payment of the application fee and begin the formal application process, which is anticipated to take roughly 6 months to complete before the loan closes. The next resolution is related to a state funding appropriation. In 2021, the district received notification of a $1 million funding allocation through Assemblymember Mark Levine's office. The funding appropriation is being handled by the State Water Board. In order to facilitate this funding transfer, the district board of directors must approve a resolution authorizing the district to accept the funds. And the
Wow.
final resolution is related to a new drought-related grant. On March 23rd, the district was notified by the Department of Water Resources that the district would be awarded $2 million from the Urban and Multi-Benefit Drought Relief Grant Program. In order to accept the grant, the district must submit an authorizing resolution for the grant agreement within 30 days. District staff have been in communication with the Department of Water Resources regarding the status of the Intertie project and is in the process of preparing an updated grant scope of work to focus on the Intertie environmental impact report and the associated alternative water supply analysis. In order to accept this grant, staff is requesting the Operations Committee review and refer to a regular bi-monthly meeting of the Board of Directors, adoption of a resolution authorizing the General Manager to negotiate and sign a grant agreement with DWR. In order to initiate the full WIFIA application, staff is requesting the Operations Committee review and refer to a regular bi-monthly meeting of the Board of Directors, approval of the WIFIA full loan application, along with authorization of payment of an initial $100,000 fee to initiate this loan process. And finally, staff is requesting the Operations Committee review and refer to a regular bi-monthly meeting of the Board of Directors, adoption of a resolution authorizing the district to accept a state funding appropriation for Pine Mountain Tunnel Take Replacement Project. Thank you.
Hi, Matt. A couple of questions. $100,000 loan application fee, pretty steep. What's it for?
It's a required payment to the US EPA to initiate the loan process, similar to the initiation of a bank loan process.
I understand that, but what do you think they're doing for $100,000?
I think I would consider it sort of a due diligence fee or an earnest money fee where they are looking for us to commit to the process.
I see.
Yeah.
I see. That makes sense.
It goes back into the project anyway, doesn't it, ultimately? Yeah.
Yes, it does.
Yeah. Yeah, this looks like what I would have to characterize as a home run, Matt. You've clearly been very busy. This is, a pretty amazing stuff. As a, triple shot here. Very good.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to say the exact same thing. Home run
I
all the
agree.
way.
Yeah.
Agreed. Do we have, sounds fantastic. Do you have anything else that's in the offer? Keep going. No, all joking aside, this is great. Do we have any other prospects for covering the costs of this project? It's a really important project, but it's pretty expensive.
Yes, we recently submitted a loan or an application to FEMA for a hazard mitigation grant program grant in the amount of about $18 million, and we will find out in a few months about the prospects of that. That's for Pine Mountain Tunnel Project. We also have made several member requests to members of Congress at the state and federal level for funding for this project as well.
Great, thank you.
So Matt,
Members of Congress beyond Jared Huffman?
Yes, Senators Feinstein and Padilla, and then also Assemblymember Mark Levine at the state level.
Matt,
Go ahead,
the
Larry.
third piece, the $2 million piece, is that going to go to our water resilience study?
That is to be negotiated. Paul might want to clarify that, but it is our understanding that part of it will go towards the EIR for the Intertie, and part will go hopefully to pay for part of that study.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that about, that's what you understand too, Paul?
Yeah, I believe Ben, if he's able to comment, would have a more detailed comment, but in his discussions with DWR on this, I believe the use of those $2 million is connected to the Intertie, but to the extent that we just sort of connect how loosely we can connect is really the bound. Yeah.
Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. We're having a little
Yeah.
challenges here today. Anyway,
Well,
the initial grant was for the Intertie. When we submitted it, we were on the track of moving full speed. And DWR has provided the $2 million grant so long as we move forward in a way that there's linkages to the intertie, and they have agreed that the water supply assessment does link very much to the intertie because it's confirming what project is the right one at the right time for us to move forward with, and the intertie is part of that assessment.
Well, I think it's, you know, like Jack said, it's a home run and a big relief on Pine Mountain too, to get that kind of sort of affirmation as far as the importance of the project. I think is, you know, a good thing, a gold star for the district, really, that our higher ups have confidence in what we're doing. So that's nice. So
Yeah.
really good work
Yeah.
on all the way around, really, the whole application plus everything else. So good news.
I have another question, Matt. What are the terms of the loan and what's the interest rate?
So the interest rate for WIFIA loan is set at the Treasury slugs rate, which is the state and local rate. And so that is to be determined because it'll close in about 6 months. So if there's interest rates rising in that time, of course, it's going to affect the closing rate. What we set it at when we first scoped this was, I think, roughly 1.08%, which is what we saw other WIFIA loans closing at. That's admittedly probably a little bit low, but under that scenario, a $10.8 million loan over 30 years would amount to $12.6 million, which would then translate to a payment on our part of about $420,000 per year, or about $35,000 per month.
But it's a savings of $6 million over the term of the loan in your report compared to getting a bond, a muni bond. So
yeah, that was our initial comparison basis.
Yeah, so that's great.
Mhm.
Okay, can I get any public comment, Terry?
No public comment.
Terry? Hello?
There is no public comment.
Okay, great. Can I get a motion to refer this to the board?
Moved.
Okay. Next item is number 3, the Pine Mountain Tunnel.
Good morning, directors. Crystal Yasmin, Director of Engineering. I've got Alex Anaya here. He's our engineering manager for design, and he's going to speak about this project.
Thank you very much, Crystal, and good morning, directors. This morning, I'm pleased to present the item for the Pine Mountain Tunnel Tanks Replacement Project, and Matt did an excellent job kind of setting me up for this next phase. So this first phase of the project will involve clearing the project site, excavating and offhaul about 45,000 cubic yards of earth in preparation for the future tank construction, along with an installation of a retaining wall that's about 450 feet in length and 70 feet tall at the highest point, with some retaining wall safety fencing and a guardrail along Sky Oaks Road and some site drainage improvements. The construction for this project is required to occur between August 1st through January 31st in protection of the northern spotted owl nesting season. So owl surveys will be performed to determine if there's a possibility of possibly extending the construction window slightly beyond that time frame. But either way, the construction for this first phase is anticipated to span 2 construction seasons. The engineer's estimate for this first phase of the project is $4,502,000. And as Matt kind of just mentioned, we will be receiving about $1 million in funding from Assembly Member Mark Levine's office in support of this project. This project was advertised last week on April 5th, and project bids will be open on May 10th. So if the bid documents are acceptable, staff will be making a recommendation at a future board meeting for contract award. District staff recommended action is for review and referral to the board, with the operations committee recommendation to proceed with the project. And I'll take any questions if there's any.
I have a couple questions.
Sure.
So what's the plan as far as where you're going to take the spoils?
Great question, Director Bragman. The first top 4.5 feet of soil needs to be off-hauled to the landfill because it's got sudden death oak syndrome spore in it. So that's got to be off-hauled to landfill. So that's about 10,000 cubic yards, and the remaining will be placed at our Bullfrog quarry and graded in there until we are done with the second phase, which is the construction of the tanks, in which time we will bring some of that material back and backfill around the tanks.
So as far 10,000 cubic yards is what, 200 trucks, or how many per truck?
About 720 truckloads. So
Wow.
we've been coordinating. Yeah, it's quite a bit of material. So we have been coordinating with Marin County and the town of Fairfax just to get people queued up for that off haul to the dump site. Now the remaining material is going to be going out Sky Oaks on to Bullfrog. So the impact onto Bolinas Fairfax should be minimal, which is the bulk of the off hauling.
Over what?
That's
what
good
period
to
of
hear.
time?
Good, Jack, just a couple more questions before you jump in. So do we pay road impact fees to Fairfax?
There will be some road fee associated with this encroachment permit that get us for the hauling, yes.
Okay. And then the other thing I wanted to ask is, I mean, you've already kind of answered about taking it to Bullfrog and then using it to backfill. And I was just gonna, that which is great. Whether, you know, our next item, I think, is a contract for road and trail, whether we could use any of it for, you know, berms or other fill needs, you know, in our own district or even with the flood district. So I'm sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's definitely that possibility for a watershed to use some of that material. In fact, some of the larger rock that will be coming out of that area of excavation, we're going to try to grade it down to a manageable size so the watershed folks can use it as energy dissipation on culvert projects throughout the watershed.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's good to hear. Okay, thanks a lot.
Yeah, I just, Alex, wanted to ask how, over what period of time do those 750 trucks pass through? It sounds very impactful on the community.
Great question, Director Gibson. Since this is spanning over 2 seasons, the first season we're going to try to get down as low as possible, and then we'll probably end up winterizing the site at the end of this year in January of 2024 to go into the following season.
Okay.
And then we'll continue then. So it's probably going to be spread out over the 2-year season.
All
So
right.
it's not going to be all 700 over, you know,
Yeah.
a 6-month time frame.
A big Wednesday or something. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
All right. Good. Thank you.
You
And
guys did a
Larry-
good job. You guys did a good job in Ross on that other project of sort of keeping things pretty quiet with the town of Ross. So we'll see how you do with Fairfax.
Yeah.
We've
And
been
there-
working to
For
do
reference.
good outreach.
Yeah, well, you're gonna be burning your brakes by Deer Park Villa. You know?
Yeah.
And really only one way out, right? I mean, it's not like we could choose all alternative routes.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
So a dump truck is 10 to 20 yards, depending on the size of the dump truck, just so you get a reference. I have a question about this Phytophthora. Alex,
Yes.
are we going to do any analysis in this? Are you going to stick with the top 4 feet, or is it already been sampled to show that it's all the way down to 4 feet?
Great question, Director Russell. And that's already been sampled and analyzed, and that's the section that's been recommended to be removed.
And is there a requirement to do that?
Well, if we are placing it at Bullfrog Quarry, we do not want to bring that material to a different side of the watershed. That's why we're getting rid of it. Otherwise, we don't
But
want
we
to
could-
transport it.
Couldn't we treat it?
I'm not too familiar with that spore and if it is treatable.
I'm
If
on the
there's
internet
something-
right now. It appears to be. That's why I'm asking the question.
Okay.
Alex, if you don't mind, I'll jump in really quick and just clarify. The Phytophthora that we're actually targeting in this off-haul is Cinnamomum, which is a soil-borne pathogen. So it's not Phytophthora ramorum, which is the one that we're seeing in our tan oaks that's having such an impact.
I see.
It's actually a soil-borne pathogen. We have seen it around Lake Lagunitas. We've done sampling specifically for it, and it's had a severe impact on some of our madrone trees on the watershed. So we're really sensitive about how we manage soil and utilize that material. So we'll be following the Phytosphere recommendation, which is a consultant that specializes in these types of analyses, to off-haul that top 4 feet.
And so when they off haul it to, I'm assuming they're going to take it up to Novato.
Yeah, that'll probably be the quickest turnaround time for the contractor, correct?
And so then we're going to be paying some pretty hefty dump fees, I assume, for all that.
Yes.
Yeah.
It seems to me we should talk to them. I mean, they need 6 feet of cover on every load. You know, I think there may be some negotiating there to say this is a benefit to them, not a waste. You know,
It's worth trying.
it's worth a try. They're buying the cover dirt right now. So
Oh,
let me know if you need some contacts at Waste Management. I can give you a little hand there.
oh, thank you.
Okay. Any public comment? So that means we have some, or what's going on?
Yes, I do see one hand raised. Terry's the host, so she'll bring this person in.
I apologize. There is one public comment, Mr. Roger Roberts. If you can hear me, go ahead, sir.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Loud and clear, Roger.
Is any of this funding that's been described this morning for the Pine Mountain Tunnel available for decommissioning of the existing tunnel? Not just the new project to replace it, but the decommissioning cost. And I'm curious as to what that might cost and if it is funded already or how it will be funded.
Roger, I could jump in on this. At some point, we would install an isolation valve to the tunnel. However, decommissioning the tunnel is still being reviewed in terms of planning efforts. It's possible we might use that tunnel for other purposes. So we're not going to backfill the tunnel at this time, but we are looking into what to do with it.
So you don't have any plans right now that could be incorporated in the funding plans for the Pine Mountain Tunnel decommissioning. Is that what I'm hearing?
Correct. We're not planning on backfilling the tunnel at this time. If anything, it would just be the installation of an isolation valve after the project is complete.
Thank you.
There are no further speakers.
Okay. Can I get a motion to refer this to the board?
So moved.
Crystal, just before we move on, and it's probably kind of a silly question, but what about backfill? If we knew what we were going to do with the tunnel, and I know we don't know yet, but what about backfilling it with some of the spoils? I mean, we would be saving a significant amount of time as far as, well, maybe not. Never mind. Not if we're going to take it to Bullfrog. Never mind.
Well, but the 10,000 could go in there if we were going to head that direction.
No.
I don't think the timing is going to be there though.
No. Okay, sorry.
Okay. Thank you. Let's move on to roads and trail maintenance contract.
Good afternoon or good morning, committee member Sean Horn, Watershed Resources Manager. The item before you is the Watershed Roads and Trails Maintenance Contract. The district released a notice inviting bidders on April 9th to submit proposals for a Watershed Roads and Trails Maintenance Contract. This was posted on the district's website as well as advertised in the local paper. The intention is to open bids on April 28th, and the district would like to move forward with the lowest qualified bidder at that time. So today, the intention of this contract specifically is to help us implement our roads and trails management plan, which the board approved in 2005. We have a number of large efforts going on the watershed, those being culvert replacement projects that we've got a current permit package for 35. We're working on another 70 culverts that we'd be implementing over the next 3 to 4 years. We also have the Azalea Hill Trail project that we're implementing. And then we have our routine roads and trails maintenance that we do on an annual basis. So this contractor would be filling in to support our existing maintenance staff to conduct all of those projects over the coming years. So what we're asking the committee to do today is to review and refer this contract to a future regular board of directors meeting for approval, and also authorize the general manager to execute any future amendments to this contract. So with that, I'll answer any questions that you might have regarding the roads and trails maintenance contract.
How much money are we talking about?
Yeah, so we're generally estimating right now about 250,000. I think we're expecting some, increases in costs based on just kind of what's going on in the construction industry right now. But we do have about 200,000 in our capital budget for culvert repairs over the next couple of years, as well as a large sizable grant for Azalea Hill that would be supporting this contract.
And then how much is left to do routine road and trail maintenance?
Yeah, so it'll be an on-call contract, and we'll kind of design and fill in these projects. So they'll be doing portions of Azalea Hill. They won't be implementing all of it. They'll be doing portions of our culvert repairs. They probably won't do every single culvert repair. And so they'll fill in on the maintenance of the roads and trails as needed as well.
And do we get data from them as far as where they're working and what they're doing?
Oh, yeah, we would have all control and direction over their work. So we'd be collecting kind of the cost of a culvert repair and, linear feet of trail or roads that are completed. So we'd have all that information about cost.
Yeah, and what I'm more focusing on is data on actually what they're doing as far as trail maintenance.
Yeah, we could collect that.
It's relevant to track erosion, where the erosion is happening, so that we could maybe fold that into that recreation plan. I think we may need some data on actually where the erosion's happening, what it's associated with, what kind of activity, maybe. So is there any way you can grab that data from this type of contract?
This would be more focused on doing the maintenance. So our staff can definitely do some of those assessments and generate that information around where we're seeing issues on the watershed. But this would be really the implementing entity behind that assessment.
And then does this contract cover the paved roads at all?
Yeah, we could use them on Sky Oaks Road, and there will be culvert repairs that we do on Sky Oaks Road, as well as potential small retaining wall type features that need to be enhanced or replaced.
And then the other thing I wanted to ask you about is, I know you've been to TAC, and there's this emerging science about the toxic chemical that's coming off of tires and going into creeks. It's like very, very lethal to aquatic creatures.
6-PPD.
Yep. Correct. So I think we need to get ahead of that, at least as far as learning how to mitigate the amount that's coming off those paved roads. So it's just, I know we talked about it at TAC. It's just reducing the amount of runoff, creating some vegetation barriers, so you're not just getting all that runoff with all that tire chemical into the adjacent creeks. So it's just something, it's kind of this emerging area, and it's extremely lethal to aquatic creatures. So I don't know if there's been any discussion of that, or whether there's been any thought given to it, but we have had discussions in TAC about mitigating the harm caused by that chemical.
Yes,
perhaps, Sean, we should consider street sweeping the roads.
Yeah, we have a very limited number of paved roads on the watershed. I think the TAC is doing some analysis to do water quality collection in Lagunitas Creek to understand if that chemical is an issue or not for this watershed. So when we get that information, I think that'll give us more understanding of things we can do.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Okay.
Of course,
well,
it would still be cheap. It'd still be cheap to street sweep. If
Well,
the quantity of roads is small, it can't hurt to street sweep.
we were even talking about just leaving a little more vegetation. They come in and clear the roads, you know, they're doing whatever, a 3-foot band of clearance, you know, if you leave a little extra, you know, it'll sort of soak up some of that chemical, get it down into the soil, hold it instead of letting it go in the creek. But I do agree we need to do some water analysis to see what the situation is. So anyway,
Yeah.
it's just something, it's something I think we need to get ahead of.
Yeah, I mean, this is an issue that I'm aware of as well, and in some of the other work that I do outside the board. I think it's the extent to which 6-PPD is the chemical, and that's in tires that's at issue and has been shown to have a significant impact on salmonids particularly, and coho in particular. Figuring out the mitigation measures, there's a lot of work that's going on, and the DTSC, the Department of Toxic Substance Control, is already working with the tire industry to figure out the science and to understand it a little bit better. Most of the data has come from Oregon and Washington. So it's, I think there's just some figuring out to do what the right mitigation measures are, and whether there's going to be any broader testing of the presence of 6-PPD in different watersheds. Maybe we can get on a list of data collection efforts that would happen, and that would enable us to get that information, but maybe not have the costs or the challenge of conducting that data collection. But I think it would be good to get clear if there are some things that we can do within our watershed to mitigate the impacts until an alternative for that chemical in tires can be developed, which is I think my understanding is that it will take quite some time, because you're talking about changing the chemistry of road tires and all the safety issues that go with that.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen too quickly, but you know, the testing protocol, I think, is a good place to start. So that I appreciate that comment, Sean, and maybe we can figure out how to get that going.
Do you know, Monty, if it adsorbs, or is it a hard chemical?
I don't know. It's pretty, I think a lot of the understanding around it is still relatively new. And I know that there's ongoing data. I'm not up to date on the latest of what's happened in the last 8 or 9 months, which is kind of the last time I really tuned into it.
Thanks. Okay. So.
We have one public comment.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Roger Roberts, please. Go ahead, sir. You've been unmuted. Or you may allow, there you go.
This is a question, and I don't know if anybody has an answer to it. A mitigation that is often used in cities is sumps at the point of collection of material that is a result of runoff from rainstorms. And I don't know whether that would be a potential mitigation measure that could work for culverts connecting runoff from roads to streams. But is that a feasible possibility? Is that part of what's being studied or not?
That's why I asked Roger whether it adsorbed or not, because if it's the kind of things you're talking about, work fine for suspended solids, but not for dissolved. So if it's in the water, you're kind of
I understand, but there may be some potential mitigation in terms of the runoff incorporating the chemical along with the soil and dirt and other material that winds up in the gutter.
Sure.
You know, sorry. If I could, you know, have you guys ever been in touch with McStop? it's the county agency which is responsible for storm runoff collection and direction and all that. You know, they might be interested in helping us out on this. So
That's a good idea.
you know,
Does anybody know the concentrations we're talking about? Is it like parts per million or parts per billion or?
I've got a study. It's, let me see.
Director Russell, I think it's about 0.8 micrograms.
Oh, so it's pretty low.
Yeah.
Yeah. And do you think that I'm just looking at its SDS, it's got, it's insoluble is the way they characterize it. So you think it's attached to crumb rubber particles, rubbed off rubber?
Yeah, I'd be interested to know how they, you know, it probably complexes and maybe changes pH depending. I don't know enough about it. I don't think the scientific community understands the toxicity pathways. There is some evidence that it affects coho salmon, but I don't know that they know if there's any other effects on other aquatic species. So we're as Director Bragman indicated, this is kind of emerging. So yeah. I think we got some work to do.
Yeah.
Well, I go back again to, it seems to me that street sweeping before the rain makes sense under almost any condition, you know, because that's the time you have the chance to catch this kind of thing when it's just laying there for months on months.
Not to belabor the point, but there are other sort of measures that can be taken, repaving with sort of 50%, you know, changing the nature of the roadway, speed, tire inflation, just, you know, basic things. But I think, as Sean noted, we don't have too many paved roads, you know, directly over, you know, critical streams.
But that's why it's even better. That means you can attack it. You know, the problem we have though is our friends at the county are going to control paving and things like that, not us.
Yeah,
we can ask.
So this is if this is an item of interest to the board, we can certainly bring it back as an agendized item, but it's you know, related to the road contract, but the road contract is what's in front of the board for referral this morning. Just want to remind everyone the scope of a discussion.
We digressed.
A little bit of that is okay. Just trying to get us back on track now.
Okay, so we need to refer this to the board. Is that where we're headed?
That's correct. It's a review and referral item.
So can I get a motion to do that?
Yep, so moved.
Okay. Okay, Paul, you're up.
Lucky for us, we have Carrie here today. Thanks, Carrie.
Yeah, good morning, board. Carrie Pollard, Water Efficiency Manager. Let me pull up my presentation here. All right, so we'll be discussing the water shortage emergency restrictions that remain in place and also touch on our incentives, the conservation and drought incentives that were enacted or currently available. Quick overview, we'll start with a summary of the executive order that was issued in March. We'll look at the actions that have already been taken to date around repealing the water shortage emergency restrictions. We'll review the remaining restrictions, look at the proposed changes that staff has developed for either, you know, deactivating some specific emergency restrictions, and then also others that are being proposed to be incorporated into our normal year actions. We'll wrap up with a review of the incentive offerings and discuss the next steps. So a few bullet points on the governor's executive order. It was lengthy, but these are kind of the three top points that really are applicable to us and worth noting. It states that by May 25th, the water board must make a few considerations. First and foremost would be to, or maybe not foremost, but first is listed is adopting an emergency regulation to ban irrigation of non-functional turf. And so this is, again, it would be applicable to existing non-functional turf within the commercial, industrial, and institutional sectors. The second item is that each water supplier must submit an annual water supply and demand assessment. This was already a rule that had been put in place, but they've moved the date up by 1 month, asking for a preliminary assessment, and then a final needs to be submitted by July 1st. So what this evaluation really is that it considers unconstrained water demands, and it looks at current available water supply, plus assuming the next year is dry, what, if any, water shortage is projected. So this is really meant to be a short-term evaluation of potential drought. And the last bullet point touches on that the state board must consider requiring water utilities to implement a stage of their water shortage contingency plan that applies to up to at least a 20% reduction. So generally that's stage 2. So this water shortage contingency plans will likely be the tool that the state board uses to direct water utilities to take specific drought actions. And recognizing that, I wanted to show the board, kind of remind the board that, that as part of our 2020 Urban Water Management Plan, we did update our water shortage contingency plan. So this was adopted last June, kind of right in the thick of in the heat of the drought. We have 6 levels, 6 water shortage levels, or actually 7, I guess, if you include 0. And then the percent shortage reduction range. So, level 1, which would be considered a named low rainfall, would require up to 10% conservation or reduction in demands. The 2 far left columns of this table were assigned by the state. They were part of the state's guidance for naming and, or rather, what percent shortage should be hit at each stage. But the water shortage condition is unique to every water utility across the state. So for us, looking at our current storage at just over 72,000 acre feet, we would be in the normal level, the normal storage level. What the governor's executive order states is that we would be required to enact at least this up to this stage, this advisory stage. So throughout, when I go through each of the restrictions that are currently in place, I will refer to this shortage level here, just to kind of as a reference point, so you know that that's what I'm referring back to.
And Carrie, could you help a little bit with the shortage levels, what those words mean? Advisory stage, alert stage?
Yeah, so it was, when they were named, they were intended to help communicate to the public what level 1 means, right? Saying level 1 may not, is at the highest level of the lowest level, right? So we staff and our consultant worked with us to name these as they progress through a higher range of shortage or need for conservation or need to conserve or demand reduction, going from alert to severe to critical to finally that emergency stage to really help convey the situation.
And is it envisioned these are mandatory or recommended?
So they're adopted as part of our water shortage contingency plan. The first few levels are voluntary, and within each of these levels, there's an extensive level of detail of what specific actions would the district take, what specific prohibitions are associated with that particular level. What type of report. The plan really goes into quite a bit more detail, but this is really just a snapshot of kind of reminding us all that this was developed and that we do have it in place.
Thanks.
Sure thing. So moving on, looking at the actions that have already been taken to repeal some of the emergency drought restrictions. In January, the water use limits and those associated penalties were removed. And then in February, the outright prohibition on irrigation was rolled back to allow for 2 days of watering throughout the service area. Taking a look before we jump into the list at these kind of the categories of these non-essential use restrictions. So we have our normal year, which would be that stage 0, if you would, just establishing the culture of water efficiency, just ongoing programs. The next level was the emergency restrictions. So that would be, kind of anything beyond stage 3, 4, 5, and 6 within that, for that prior table that escalate over time, depending on water supply conditions, to enact, additional restrictions on our customers and how they use water. And then finally, the third kind of tier is this statewide drought emergency declaration. This declaration calling for a 15% reduction was adopted in January, and based on the governor's executive order, we can anticipate the state board revising this emergency declaration and issuing a new one that calls for at least a 20% reduction statewide. But because that hasn't happened yet, we are still looking at this 15% reduction.
So you're anticipating that before the next water year starts?
Correct. By May 25th, the state board needs to take action.
May 25th. Okay.
Yes.
There's been a good amount of precipitation up in the Sierras recently. So, you know, we may be, we may have caught a little bit of a break. We'll see.
Right, right. Yeah, so the governor's executive order was issued at the end of March, and since then there has been some. So, you know, will that be enough to change the statewide, you know, need is yet to be seen. I don't have a guess.
Yeah.
I don't think so, because the snowpack is what drives it, not the precipitation. So
yeah,
I don't think they picked up much snow, but
there was about 10 inches up there, according to a friend who was skiing up there this week.
Yeah. The problem is that, you know, it's at that 35%, it takes a whole lot of snow to get back to normal.
Yeah, they need 10 feet.
Yeah, exactly.
So what we have before you today for this informational item is some recommended changes to the emergency restrictions. The top of this list show the 4 items staff is proposing to deactivate. And I have subsequent slides really going into the details of each one of these. And then on the bottom section is what staff is proposing to add to the normal year. Again, we'll go into detail on this. This is kind of a good snapshot of what we're going to be looking at. All of these were, you know, both the deactivate list and the add to normal year list were all enacted as part of our emergency drought response. And some seem to be kind of rising to the surface as appropriate for bringing forward. So starting with the car wash restriction, this is the prohibition states that using potable water to wash vehicles, except at a commercial car wash, is prohibited. This would be included as part of our stage 3, our alert stage of our current water shortage contingency plan. When we look at the impact, it's approximately 50 gallons per car wash using a shutoff nozzle. You know, we didn't go into the impact much beyond that because we don't know how many cars are out there, how often someone will plan on washing their car, et cetera. But just recognizing that it's about 50 gallons per occurrence. I think it's important to note that we have normal year restrictions, these kind of level 0, if you would, of our water shortage plan that applies to all customers that would be washing their vehicles, right? So no runoff is allowed, and they're required to use a garden hose with a shutoff nozzle when doing this activity. And so those normal year restrictions really kind of address the potential for waste. The next item is the pool requirements. So there's 2 pool requirements, starting with pool filling. It's currently stated that pool filling is not permitted and pool filling is not allowed for completely drained pools or any new pools permitted after December 1st. This would be included as level 5 of our critical stage, if you would, of our water shortage contingency plan. Staff recommendation is to deactivate this restriction. When we look at the impact, on average, pools are about 10,000 gallons per pool. And since this was enacted, we have had about 20 sites or 20 pools inquire about refilling, not to say whether or not their pools are being filled, you know, without reaching out to us, but we have heard from about 20 different sites. Moving on to the use of pool covers. So the prohibition states that use of pool covers in all swimming pools to reduce evaporation is required. The recommendation would be to bring this forward into our normal year program to permanently require pool covers. When we look at the impact, it's the evaporation rate of an uncovered pool is really comparable to turf grass. And when you look at the potential reduction, it varies depending on the type of pool cover. So a liquid pool cover would be 30 to 50% range, solid more like 90. And so the impact would be about between 3,000 and 9,000 gallons per pool. The use of pool covers is included in our water shortage contingency plan at level 3. Again, we are proposing it being included in our normal year. The incentive program is currently in place, and you'll see later in the presentation, but we are proposing that we retain that drought rebate and that drought incentive as we move forward.
Of course, I think, Carrie, it's important to indicate that pools are small compared to grass. You know, a lawn, it's unusual to have a pool that's the entire side of the backyard. So
right.
the
Scale is important.
Yeah, you're correct about the evapotranspiration side of it. That makes perfect sense. The other question I had about these last two slides is, does this address the issues of the pool group that wrote us about a week ago or 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, so if these were deactivated, it would allow pools to be filled, which was the concern of the association that had inquired with us.
And I'm going to ask this question, but I'll ask it now. And it's both for you and Paul. How do we assess the upcoming rainfall? I mean, how do we know where we are? I understand the logic of comparing it to that slide. I got that. But I'm more worried about this time next year, and how I understand you don't know the answer. And I do appreciate that. But I want to understand how it was incorporated in the thinking. And I'm not against what you're proposing. What you're proposing makes perfect sense. However, I'm just a little nervous.
I can try and then let Paul kind of correct me if I'm wrong, if that works for Paul. I would say that these restrictions were enacted as part of our emergency response, right? We were in very different water supply conditions when these were proposed. And you can see that in the level of water shortage contingency plan, kind of the level that it would be associated with was really aligned with where we were at last year. And as we move forward, you know, depending on water supply conditions, they can be brought back, right? They are incorporated into our water shortage contingency plan down the road, but based on supply conditions right now, it's not necessarily warranted. I'll turn it over to Paul.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that, Director Russell, is that, you know, as you noted, the use of pool covers is really where the meat is. If we require the use of pool covers, I think, you know, we can kind of preserve that water. So if the concern was filling pools and, you know, you have to refill them every year, but if we're using pool covers, then I think it's going to dramatically reduce that refill rate.
We identified the houses with pools on the GIS.
We do have we can extract from the county GIS data the houses that have pools that were permitted. And
we're not making a distinction in turf. We make a distinction: functional versus non-functional. Recreational turf doesn't fall into the application. There are pools that are very heavily used and pools that are not used at all. That strikes me as a very big distinction.
And I think
meaning what, Jack? Where are you headed?
Well, if you use the pool frequently, the cover is it's a problem. If you don't use the pool at all, obviously the cover is no problem.
Well, if you're using the pool, I mean, the covers are retractable. So, you know, I mean, it's really pretty easy to, you know, retract them when you're using it. So, I mean, I hear you, but we have a pool and we have a cover. We have a cover.
Yeah.
I'm actually getting a new cover this week, hopefully 16 millimeter, so it doesn't get so brittle. But that's the way it works. They're on spools and you just wind them
not
up.
all on spools, however. There's some you lay it out and then pick it up.
Yeah.
Floating.
Yeah. I have a question, just, and it's a little bit of a digression, but you know, and I've raised it before, is raising our triggers as far as our trigger points for when we're determining which phase we're in. Because I think one of the problems last year was our trigger was low enough that we lost time kind of getting the message out. And I think if we raise those triggers, maybe 2,500 or 5,000 acre feet, it would kind of get us ahead of the curve. of getting the word out to the community to start thinking about it, because, you know, that was really one of the biggest challenges we had. And, you know, we lost 2 or 3 months just getting people to understand how critical the situation was. So I know we've talked about it before, but it is something that I think is worth considering.
Yeah, I think we can send you the water shortage contingency plan, but Carrie's slide does show a change in those trigger points.
Okay.
So you'll see that
Okay.
if you have time to review that more closely. But
Okay.
you know, we were developing that in the middle of the drought as we were thinking about what ordinances to put on to. So it was a very complex time for the district, and we do want to bring this back to make sure the board has a good visibility into it. So we're looking into it and, you know, trying to go back now retroactively and look at it and how well it would apply. Do we need to make any changes? And we probably will make a couple tweaks here and there.
Yeah. And so that would require amending our ordinances.
Yeah, I defer to Molly on that, but
there are triggers that are incorporated into the ordinance that would need to be changed, which I think should be, which is kind of my point.
Yes, that's an excellent point, Director Bragman. And we haven't done that in response to the most recent adoption of the water shortage contingency plan, because we did anticipate that we would want to get some time to evaluate it relative to our recent learning experience, make sure that it was really where the board wanted it, and then look at changing the code to match the intention behind the water shortage contingency plan.
Yeah,
So
understood. I just think it would give us more time, you know, which is critical to really like implementing these drought policies. So thanks a lot.
I just wanted to add one thing, if I could. To be clear with this conversation, staff will be coming back to the board to both revisit the work we did on this new model for the water shortage contingency plan based on our experience with the drought, as you're suggesting, Director Bragman, as well as incorporate these into our code so we have alignment. And we intentionally, it was in the middle of the drought and we didn't cross that T. So we'll be bringing both back to the board probably in the next 2 or 3 months to have that discussion.
Yeah, no criticism intended. And, you know, you got to look at the data before I understand that. So.
Yeah, and Molly, you know, I don't think it matters what the board wants here. It matters what the science says is the dictating factor. This is not a decision. This is an evaluation of facts. And so, you know, it's true that the board needs to approve it, but the reality is that what we need is the science to decide what to do. And
absolutely.
Both Paul and Ben, you said the same thing, which kind of gets under my skin a little bit. You said that when we were in the middle of the drought, I think we're still in the middle of the drought. And while maybe we need to watch our words there in terms of intensity of drought, you know, to qualify it, to say when we were in the critical drought or something like that, because I am very, very nervous about the future. It just doesn't smell right to me. And for those of you who know me, a lot of my consulting business is based on intuition. I get hired by people to ask what the future is going to hold. And I'm offering free advice here that I don't see a bright future for the drought side of things. I think we're stuck in this drought cycle for a while, and we need to be very, very careful. The person who commented, there was a written comment that came in with the board packet, and you know, it was interesting point of view. She was recommending that we institute immediate drought restrictions, taking a longer term view. So all I'm talking about here or encouraging is let's make sure we're looking up and not looking at our feet while we're going through this process.
Along those lines, we've heard some of those comments in the past, and this presentation reflects it. We're trying to look at the past event that we got out of as a water shortage emergency and not calling that a drought, and understanding that we are still in a drought. Good.
Yeah, I like that.
Okay, I'm gonna move on. We have a few more slides.
Yes, Carrie, sorry.
That's okay. It's good discussion. So looking at golf course irrigations, there's really two prohibitions that are applicable to golf courses at this time. First is the irrigating of, is it being limited to greens and tees? So this was part of our initial drought response when we, had the 40% reduction call to action. The golf courses in turn pursued an alternative means of compliance to the variance process, and they were able to achieve a 47% reduction below their baseline. The other is the irrigation limited to 2 days a week. So the board may recall, there was an outright prohibition on irrigation. At that time, all the golf courses stopped irrigating. But when the irrigation prohibition was lifted and 2 days a week was allowed, and that was loosened for other customers, the golf courses then reached out and said, they'd like to also get some relief from the restrictions as well. And so they pursued an alternative means of compliance for that item as well, and has achieved, since February, a 33% reduction below their baseline. The staff recommendation here is to deactivate the greens and tees restriction, which was part of our 40% reduction actions. And that's also part of our severe stage, our stage 4, but yet maintain the requirement that they comply with the days per week restriction that all of our customers would be held to. When we look at the impact, the annual baseline for golf courses is about 450 acre feet a year. When we look at a 40% reduction, that would be about equivalent to 180 acre feet of water saved. And then a 20% reduction is a 90 acre feet of water saved. We are continuing to collaborate and coordinate with the golf courses. I would say one benefit, if you would, of the water supply emergency we experienced was establishing a good working relationship with the golf courses, and they're on board. They don't want to be the target. They understand their role in the community, and they want to do everything they can. And so I think that's valuable as well, worth noting. All
It's
other
interesting.
normal year, yeah,
Go ahead.
I was just saying all the other normal year restrictions that are applicable to irrigation would apply to golf courses. So time of day, number of day, runoff, overspray, etc. They would be required to comply with moving forward, regardless of if the greens and tees restriction was removed.
I understand the emotional side of this, but in using Ben's numbers, we're talking about 1 day of water. We use about 100 acre feet a day. It's kind of interesting. While I say I got the gut feeling of it, but the actual impact is pretty small, huh?
Yeah, it's less than 2% of our total average water use from the district. So yeah, potentially
For all their water, but even the savings is even less than that, huh? It's down to 0.2, a tenth of that, or 20% of it.
20%, yeah. Looking at an additional restriction we have in place is on new connections. So there's a prohibition for new connections to install landscaping. The recommendation here is to deactivate. When we evaluate the impact of this prohibition, there's been four sites that have really been hit by this prohibition on installing landscapes. And that's because there's been 2 actual new service connections within the district since July when this ordinance was enacted, and 2 sites that are upsizing their meters. So they were existing customers, but they needed a larger meter, primarily for fire flow. So those 4 sites went through our landscape plan review, and they've been notified that they cannot install their landscaping. When we see a breakdown of, how much landscaping are we talking about here, 3 sites are single family, kind of one-off residential sites. The total landscape area for all of those sites combined is just over 19,000 square feet of landscaping, and that equates to about 0.8 acre feet of water. One site is different, it's much larger. There's a discussion, they've been talking to staff about potentially pursuing a variance. It has not been formally requested, but there are discussions there that have been occurring. This is for over 100,000 square feet of landscaping, which would result in 4.5 acre feet of water going to the landscape for this site. While it's one application, it's actually for 16 new single family residential connections and 8 ADUs. I'll note that there's no turf included in their planting plan. And of course, normal year restrictions would apply to all these customers. I'm sure someone's going to ask, what site is this, right? Yes. So it's the Oak Shores in Corte Madera. It's off Robin Road, and it's one of the new service connections that's noted as of the 4. Additionally, I'll just mention that I don't want to leave the impression that there's only been 4 applications that we've received, or 4 landscapes that we've reviewed as part of, since July. An additional 36 landscape plans were submitted and required to go through our landscape plan review process because they did pull a permit, but they were existing customers and they were not upsizing their meter. And so these 36 sites were notified of drought conditions. They were discouraged to replant per the ordinance, but they were able to actually put their landscaping in. Moving on to the next prohibition is the days allowed for irrigation. So currently we have a restriction of no more than 2 days per week is the allowance. Staff recommendation is to maintain that 2 days a week, but specify that it be for spray irrigation, and then add an allowance for up to 3 days a week for drip. The intent here is to really motivate our customers, encourage our customers to transition from overhead spray to drip, which is much more efficient. And when we look at the impact of doing that conversion from overhead spray to drip, the savings are about 28 gallons per square foot per year. And so that is to convert from overhead spray to drip, but also to transition to low water use plants, just to be clear about what that water savings number is touching on. We did reach out to some, local experts or folks who have strong opinions on irrigation, not necessarily landscape contractors, but we did reach out to the Native Plant Society and the UC Cooperative Extension, and they are in support for this additional allowance. They recognize that this 3 days a week for drip would really encourage drought tolerant landscapes and also be adequate for homes that are growing fruits and vegetables on their site. And so they were in support of this change. They recognize and we know that 2 days a week is really inadequate for establishing new plantings, especially even if they're drought tolerant plantings, right? We want to establish good root structure early on in the planting so that they can survive future droughts and future dry conditions. Finally, the sewer flushing with recycled water. So the prohibition is that potable water for dust control, compaction, street cleaning, and sewer flushing, or any other use that can be met with tertiary treated recycled water should be, or shall be, yes. This is, again, level 4, which is part of our severe stage of our water shortage contingency plan. The staff recommendation is to incorporate a phased approach to permanently require flushing of sewer systems with recycled water, with the exception of emergencies, when there's an emergency. When we look at the impact, the annual baseline for sewer flushing was 6.6 acre feet. And during the drought, during the water shortage emergency, try and be clear about that, in the water shortage emergency, the sewer flushing we were able to reduce that by 60%, down to 4.1, or a savings of 4.1 acre feet. So there was a strong willingness from the local sanitation jurisdictions to work with us during that water supply emergency. And they recognize that this change, or requiring recycled water for this function, will be easier for some and really difficult for others. And so we will just continue. We'll just note that we'll continue to develop the details of this recommendation, really in coordination and collaboration with those jurisdictions. And our goal here is to maximize the use of recycled water, but we also want to note and work with them on the potential impacts.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, Carrie, if I could, that I want to make sure that the board does understand that this is quite impactful to the sanitation agencies. Sewer cleaning is essential to prevent sanitary sewer overflows. And they benefit from hydrants, and they go out and they can hook up their hydro flushing equipment to hydrants. And not being able to do that requires, in most cases, having to bring trucked water. And that's a significant cost and impact on their routine cleaning. We obviously, as you see, there's emergencies where you just have to respond, and we wouldn't want to get in the way with that. But this will have a significant impact. And the sanitation agencies are concerned about this moving into our normal year. Were the board interested to do that? So I just wanted to be clear on that point.
So the total savings with the reduction is 4 acre-feet a year cumulatively across our district?
Yes.
And Ben, I mean, I don't think there's any restrictions on the water quality for this purpose. Couldn't every sanitary district draw its water from their own effluent?
Paul can probably speak more to that. I'd say and that's largely what they were doing during the drought in different ways. The big impact, again, is having to, in some cases, purchase or rent these tanker trucks to accompany the cleaning equipment, because hydro flushing is really how most of the work is done, to my understanding. So it just requires additional staffing, additional equipment, and the hauling time. Maybe you got to do 2 trips or 3 trips in a day to keep up with the cleaning equipment. So it's really the fact that you don't benefit from just hooking up to hydrants. It's bringing the water to the work that's moving throughout their district, wherever that may be.
Yeah, but it's obviously one of the lowest water quality uses we have.
Absolutely.
And so
and
a little,
yes.
a little bit of truck driving, I mean, the hydrovactors that I've seen, most of them are self-contained. They have a tank inside of them, like a pumper truck, fire engine.
We are going to benefit, I believe, from a comment once we open public comments to the general manager of Raw Sanitary, I believe, will be providing some comments. So he knows more than I do, I believe, on this matter. He'll be able to speak to it.
Okay, so staff's looking for some direction from the board on moving forward. This is an informational item. Is there, interest from the board on staff developing formal ordinance and resolutions, whichever Molly feels is appropriate, depending on the action, to address these particular items? So if perhaps we could take it just item by item. Pool filling. Is there interest in supporting?
Before we do that, Carrie, I'd
Yeah.
like to say that you guys did an excellent job of a very logical and systematic approach to evaluating these things. I appreciate that very much. It makes our life much easier dealing with the public if we have a basis for doing things as opposed to just tummy rubbing. So great job.
Thanks. So pool filling would be the first item that's on the list here. The staff recommendation is to deactivate this pool filling requirement.
And Carrie, why don't we, as we ask the board, ask for if they have concerns instead of.
There you go. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, do we want to hear public comment before having this next part of the discussion? I'd like to, because I feel like we're sort of setting some direction, but then we might hear some information that might change inform our decision. So maybe could we go to public comment?
That's not the normal way we do it, Monty. Normally the board discussion is completed, then we go to public comment, then we come back. So if you've got any hesitation about any of these, I think we should voice them, and then we can hear what the public has to say.
I was going to second that recommendation.
Okay, whatever. It's not our standard.
I know.
So I do have a second section of the presentation is the incentives. I'm with some direction from.
Yeah, let's just
Ben
go
and-
ahead. I
Okay.
think we heard
come
the
back.
chair request
Okay.
to.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, so looking at the, sorry, do you want to go ahead and open public comment? Is that what you're saying?
No, what I had thought I heard the chair ask is to go through and see if the staff recommendation, if there's any concerns on these, we can quickly roll through those one by one, and then we'll hit the brief second part of the presentation and then open for public comment. Is that where you want to go, Chair Russell?
Yes. So any thoughts, guys?
Well,
Cynthia's online too, by the way, for, I don't know if that message was received by all, but I got a message from her. So she's online too.
So, Jack, go ahead.
Okay, well, yeah, I have, I mean, this is a lot of material we just have gone through. There's a very fine line between being the water police and letting people have choices. And I'm very much for letting people have choices. Now, how I take that philosophy and I apply it to each of these one by one is a little tricky. But the one that jumps out at me, for example, is pool covers. If somebody chooses not to have their rose garden, but to not worry about pool covers, that should be an individual choice. What we're concerned about is how much water each household uses and how they use the water. We're trying to control step by step how they make their choices and how they choose to use water, and that's a tricky path to follow here. So,
yeah, keep in mind though, Jack, that this is a true water waste. You can argue that grass has some beneficial value so that there's a return on investment of the water, but for evaporation, there's no benefit. It's just the convenience of not having to put the cover on. So kind of keep that in mind.
I disagree. I think it's impactful on how much the pool gets used. As we made the case for golf courses, for example, that there's a recreational benefit. That is same for the pools. And a pool, if you're bothered by the pool cover removing and taking off and so forth, it will cut down the recreational use of the pool.
I mean,
sure.
I think though already people who have pools under our previous restrictions had to get a pool cover. So to me, they've already invested in if they, or should have invested in getting a pool cover. Now we're just talking about whether they're going to go through the effort of taking it on or off. Personally, I think that given, we have other restrictions about the amount of time you can irrigate. I mean, all these are decisions. We could always say like you could, not use other water in your house, but irrigate, you can spray irrigate for 5 days a week and still be under some number. I think we're talking about best management practices that make sense under the situations that we're in. I would say that having a pool cover is a reasonable best management practice that is worthy of having that continue.
The pool cover issue is one of many issues throughout this. The question is, where do we give people the individual choice to make that decision for themselves?
Well, that's a piece of the pie, Jack. The other piece of the pie is to Carrie. Is there envisionment going down the road of enforcing things like this, or is it just a recommendation?
I think that the way Monty framed it is helpful, right? It really is a reasonable best management practice. Similarly, we're not going out and patrolling, even though we have time of day irrigation recommendations or rules, right? We're not going out and patrolling for those that, someone who's irrigating after, a certain time of day. So this is really meant to be a reasonable best management practice, but it would be codified in the code.
But I also want to make sure that I'm troubled. I don't really a question about whether we're enforcing or not shouldn't, I don't want to send a signal that when we have requirements that they're not, because we're not enforcing them, they're really a recommendation. When we require something, it should be required and it might be enforced. We shouldn't, I don't think it's wise to send a signal or a message that if you do something that's, you fail to do something that's required, that there wouldn't be an enforcement at some point. We're not spending our time chasing down enforcement. I also don't want to send a signal that that's suddenly what we're going to do. But these are meaningful, they're important. This is how we are going to weather the future. The Director Russell, has, I think, rightly drawn a highlight on, which is that we are in a dire set of circumstances and we need to be acting accordingly.
I think that's well said. And if I can add to the discussion, we do have, these are requirements as they are adopted in our code. We do have a process for enforcement. And I think it is, the question is how many resources are we putting out on the streets to monitor is different than it's still a requirement. And of course, our first step in the enforcement process is always notification. It's just letting people know and helping to educate folks on what the expectation is.
Well,
and to that end,
as we go through this step by step, maybe we should separate those elements out that we are encouraging versus those that we are mandating.
well, of course, most of these are being backed off, huh? That's the proposal.
Yeah, could I just make a comment?
Sure.
To me, not having a pool cover is like letting the water leak out of your hose. I mean, it's absolutely a waste of water. And it's just, it should be a part, as Monty said, of best practices. And as a practical matter, when you use a pool cover, it warms the water up, which actually increases the recreational use. So there's some benefits, recreational benefits of using a pool cover. Some of the larger pools are going to use these automatic pool covers, which we looked into. It's pretty expensive. We're probably going to use a vinyl cover. It kind of floats on top of the water. It's a solid cover, but very effective as far as reducing evaporation. And it does warm the water up, which actually does encourage use. So I agree with you as far as giving people choices. I would make a distinction on pool covers as it is best management practice. So, and as far as enforcement, that would be pretty tough because how do you know when the pool needs to be covered or not covered? I mean, it's, you might have a kid who wants to jump in the pool first thing in the morning. So,
but the first step would be to find out if they have a cover, which is why I asked the information about the GIS. In other words, it seems to be pretty low hanging fruit to me to just send a letter to everybody that has a pool, because pools are not that common in our.
And another thing that we should be doing is working with the municipalities because they require a building permit to install a pool, that should be part. They should have a checklist like they do with landscape. Check off, you need to have a pool cover. I mean, it's a very small part of the cost of having a pool, let alone constructing a pool. It's very negligible.
The pool cover is simply, this is just an example of the philosophical problem we're facing here. Yeah.
Well, it's a couple things. One, I have a hard stop at 11 o'clock, so unfortunately I'm going to need to drop off at that point in time. But I do think that we as the board, and I think the district as a whole, we are promoting best management practices. All these are best management practices that we are putting into requirements, because this is how we can help to ensure, we believe that this is important to do to be able to ensure that we meet our primary objective of having a safe and reliable water supply into the future. So I don't want to dictate what everybody does, how much water they use to brush their teeth. I don't think we have to get down to that kind of micro thing. But when we talk about big consumptions of water, like outside landscaping, we are dictating how people should irrigate. And I think that a pool is just like irrigation. And in that, in that sense, we're merely just saying, do it responsibly.
What does best management practice mean? Does it mean you do it or we fine you, or does it mean we encourage it?
It means that we are saying that if you have a pool, that you ought to have a cover on that pool to reduce evaporation when it's not in use, which is probably 90% of the time.
Okay.
90 or 95% of the time. It's just as we're saying, when you're washing your car, you can wash your car, but don't just have a hose running off into the street. Or if you're going to have, a lawn, we're saying, don't spray irrigate for more than 2 days.
Yeah, but are we setting the rule, or are we saying this is our preference? This is what we encourage. This is, quote, best management practices.
I think we're setting a requirement.
Cynthia, can I? It's Cynthia. Can I get a quick comment in? Can you hear me?
We can.
Go ahead.
Okay. So maybe this is a way to thread the needle, because I do agree with Carrie's point about best management practices. And I do think that there's an understanding of what that is. So maybe this is a question for Molly. What about identifying certain types of practices as water waste? Because what we want to do is it's not so much about having people use less. I agree with Jack. We don't want to be prescriptive, but we do want to be identifying where a particular use of water is wasteful. That is very much within our purview. And of course, all water use in the state has to be reasonable and cannot be wasteful. So I think to have the district identify for, consumers, residents, businesses, institutions, our view about what is a waste of water can be helpful in that regard, right? Yeah, you can say it positively. It's a best management practice to do ABC, but I think it also can be helpful to say, and actually, failure to do ABC or doing, something else is, in the view of this district, a waste of water, which is not allowed in this state. So what do you guys think about that?
I think it's right on. I think it is a waste, and it's a fairly big one, and it can be remediated pretty easily. So no, I think that's a good way to characterize what we're doing as far as a regulatory scheme.
Well, of course, the question remains, does it fall within our educational function or our policing function?
I think I do think it's a regulatory function, actually, because I think it is water waste. It really is. So.
Well, and the problem we have is that there's probably 20 of those issues throughout this whole presentation.
We make our choices.
Well, if I could, we're recommending these 4 to deactivate, and maybe that's a way to think about it. Is there any concerns with that? And then we're recommending just 3 to add to the normal year, the days per week for irrigation, bumping up for drip irrigation from 2 to 3 for the reasons Carrie noted, the sewer flushing prohibition that would be phased with the emergency exemption and pool cover. So we really, I believe Director Gibson, have 3 that we're recommending to move into our normal year as part of our restrictions, as part of our code with our other normal year conservation restrictions.
I'll just say, and then I do need to drop off. I'm of adding to the normal year. I think that the use of potable water for dust control is one. I just wonder whether that's something, I look at that. I when I think of potable water use for things like that are of this type, it troubles me a little bit. I know it's an inconvenience to use non-potable water, but that's one that I wonder whether that isn't another best management practice. But I'd be open to understanding more of the impacts and the constraints of doing that.
Well, we did not bring that one forward, as you note, because we're still trying to talk to the jurisdictions and understand the impact before we bring that forward. There's a lot of construction activity, sewer pipes, of course, our water pipes, just a tremendous amount of work that where, again, hydrants are very useful for dust control and compaction, and that would, we just recommend allowing us to complete those discussions, but it is something we're looking at and thinking about moving forward once we complete those discussions.
Yeah, it's, you know, if you don't allow hydrant use, you also have a lot more carbon from the added truck trips too. So it's just, it's another impact of adding that regulation.
But it is comparable in a way to the sewer flushing, with Director Russell's comments earlier of, you know, the quality of water, you know, you're just using it for dust control and keeping that down. So we'll continue those discussions, and we'll hear from, I believe, a comment or two when we have public comments on the sewer flushing item, if that works for the board.
And then just on pool filling, I think the regulation is you can't fill it with MMWD marine water. I mean, you could truck in water and fill a pool if you wanted to comply with that regulation. So I don't know how much that would cost, and I don't even know if it's particularly worth pursuing, but you can fill a pool by trucking water in, I believe, under our regulations. So
Under the current restriction as written, that's correct.
So maybe at this time, we'll run through the remainder slides and revisit this at the end.
That works.
Very good, thank you. Okay, so now moving into review of our drought emergency incentives. The top list here with the blue box around it are the new programs that were launched in response to the emergency water shortage. A couple of turf incentive programs, direct installation of sheet mulching, and then also our turf rebate, flume, pool and spa covers, hot water recirculation systems, and toilets could all receive incentives or rebates. The bottom four were existing prior to the drought, and they remained available to our customers and without any changes to those programs. When we look at the participation over the term of the water shortage emergency, I think what's notable to me actually is this active discussion around pool covers. You know, we had a incentive for pool covers for almost a decade from carryover from the last drought, and we never saw this level of participation during that entire time frame. So very impressive. Another item, of course, which is notable, is the turf replacement programs. Over 400,000 square feet were converted or were sheet mulched and no longer irrigated in response to the drought. And while that's quite impressive, it is actually only less than, or just about 1% of the total residential turf area within the district. And so while it's significant, it's shows there's still quite a bit of opportunity there for a program like this. I also want to mention at the far right of the column is the total expenditures for all of these programs. So it's in full, it's over $1.5 million. But note that the turf program, again, is the majority of those incentives. And in response to that, or recognizing that significant expenditure, staff has proposed, and in light of recovered water supply conditions, staff is looking at how can we update our turf program to really achieve long-term water savings, right? So during the emergency, we had a high rebate level at $3, very low barriers to completion of the project, and resulted in high levels of participation. And so those low barriers were things like we weren't requiring replanting. We didn't have a type of plant coverage or a percent coverage requirement. We actually discouraged replanting, right? They just had to cap the irrigation and stop irrigating the landscape. and sheet mulch. So as we move forward, looking at not only the incentive that would be offered, but also the policy and of course the outreach to drive our customers to this program will be key to ensure long-term water savings. During the drought emergency, the level of expenditures were beyond our last fiscal year's budget for incentives. Of course, we relied on reserves and as noted in prior meetings, that's was the intent, and so that made sense. But as we move forward, looking at next fiscal year, looking at the adopted budget, and developing a program that really aligns with that budget that's been approved, recognizing that there are restraints to our reserve. Our reserves are strained due to the drought actions, not only our rebates from incentive programs, but all the other drought actions as well. And we continue to see a decrease in revenue. Customers continue to respond to the drought conditions that the district is facing, even though the water shortage emergency is no longer at the forefront. So when we look at our TURF program considerations, the design elements that are being considered would be looking at a tiered rebate, so having multiple levels of rebate offerings to our customers. We would want to reinstate the plant coverage requirement with low or very low water use plants, meaning if a customer is required as part of their incentive to install plants, it's less likely, it's significantly less likely, and there's studies that show this, that they would go back to TURF at a later date. And so we really are helping ensure long-term savings are achieved by having a plant coverage requirement or having plants reinstalled in that area. And also looking at sustainable landscape practices, right? So things like use of native plants or irrigating with alternative water sources were being considered. So when we looked at those elements, we did develop some program recommendations, and here are those changes we are proposing. First would be to require a plant coverage requirement of low or very low water use plants. So this would ensure drought tolerant landscapes are installed within the community with the funds that we are investing in achieving these long-term water savings. The incentive rebate structure would be tiered at $1 per square foot for projects that are install low water use plants and follow the list of best practices. And then other projects that are that kind of don't go to that higher level could get a 75 cent per square foot for converting their turf to low water use plantings, or possibly things like permeable patio, those kind of things, right? So we're getting rid of the water use, but not necessarily installing projects with using these best practices. We also want to extend the approval period to allow for these more complex projects to be installed without needing to apply for an extension. So when we look at the progression of our program, we started with the original rebate of $1 per square foot. We did have a plant coverage requirement, and best practices were just encouraged. During the emergency drought program, significantly increased that rebate up to $3. Planting was discouraged. And at this point, recognizing that we want to be able to see those long-term water savings, we're now going back to those customers and giving them resources, providing resources to them to install the water use planting and drought tolerant landscapes, although it wasn't required as part of the program. And looking forward at these two new tiers, the new base rebate would be 75 cents per square foot. We'd have no requirement as far as plant coverage. And if any plants were installed, we would require that they do be very low or low, and best practices would be discouraged. But the new top tier rebate would be offered at $1.50. We would require 50% coverage of the area at maturity, and all plants would need to be low, very low. As far as the best practices, we would promote native plants. So they would need to install mostly natives. They need to include an alternative water source, and they would need to sheet mulch, amongst other things. So in looking at this idea of best practices, we reached out to McStop, which are our local stormwater permittees, to look at opportunities for co-funding. And those discussions have just been initiated. And it sounds like there may be interest in them working with us on establishing some best practices that they could then see value in and potentially cost share with us on this incentive. As part of this evaluation, we did do a peer review of other rebate programs in the region. Our proposal aligns nicely with what others are offering. this idea of a tiered rebate is kind of starting to take hold throughout the region. And so here's an idea, just to this is included, just to give you an idea of where others may land in relative to our proposal. Outreach, as noted, is really key to not only drive our customers to our programs, but also to make sure that they have the resources and know where to go to have the tools available to them to complete their project. So our new Water Smart Gardening Resource Center is there to provide this assistance and direction. In addition, looking at outreach to our existing approved projects. So if there are changes to this program, we of course would want to reach out to those customers who are kind of in the queue or already signed up and haven't completed their projects, so they're caught, off guard with this change. Looking at the anticipated program expenditures, the adopted budget for FY23 for incentives is $591,000. The turf portion of that incentive budget is $400,000. In addition, I want to note that an additional 1.1 million would be needed if we were to maintain the $3 per square foot rebate offering. And recognizing the reserves, the limited reserves that are available, and the reduction in revenue or decline in revenue, staff's developed this proposal that aligns with the current budgeted line item for incentives. So looking at FY23 expenditures using this tiered incentive, we're looking at residential customers having about $300,000 available to them, which would result in approximately 300,000 square feet of turf being removed. We have a breakdown there. Of course, it's just an estimate. And so there would be some flexibility in those numbers, but just to give an idea of what kind of square footage we'd be looking at. For the commercial sector, we would want to allocate some funding for really focusing on those non-functional turf areas at a $100,000, which is about 133,000 square feet. Again, aligning with our total expenditures for this program to match the adopted budget. The other incentives at 191,000, we feel are adequate. Staff feels they're adequate to cover all the other rebates. So at this time, there's no other changes are being proposed for the drought incentives beyond just this turf rebate, kind of ratcheting it down a bit, recognizing the emergency is no longer where we are, and we continuing to offer that $3 a square foot is kind of above and beyond. It made sense last year, and now it's kind of time to switch gears potentially.
Carrie, I'm not so sure I agree with you on this. It seems to me this is pretty low-hanging fruit, and I understand and appreciate your concerns about the budget, the reserves, but the reality is the real budget issue here is water. And if this incentive will encourage people, you said it was the highest level of response we've ever had or something like that, or maybe that was the pool covers. I can't remember what you're talking about there. But it seems to me that we should put the pedal to the metal here as opposed to backing off. And I think this needs some real serious review of, it's basically a one-time expenditure of $1.1 million, and I don't exactly understand your math here about what you're assuming in terms of how many houses or how many more people would convert, or how many more square feet. I mean, I can divide $3 into 1.1 million, but I don't know what percentage of the folks that is. Is that 2% increase or a 20% increase?
That would result in approximately 1 additional percent increase of our total residential turf within the service district. So
600 houses.
Let's see. The average conversion was about 900 square feet, and we did 400,000 square feet. So I don't know how many sites that would be.
Well, just assume it's 1,000, it'd be 450, give or take. Instead of making 900, make it 1,000, it's 450 sure. Houses. So that's, a fraction of 1% of our customers. I think this one, my recommendation would be that we provide serious thought on this one. Not that you haven't already, but in terms of a strategy. In other words, you know, let's just let it go philosophically. What if we were at $10 a square foot? What would happen then?
Yeah, it's a great question, Director Russell. You know, what's the sensitivity for people doing this work? And we really don't know that $3 versus $1.50 will make a notable difference. On one hand, the staff recommendation is through FY23, distinguished from going forward, where as part of the upcoming budget and rate discussion, we would talk about it and budget accordingly, whatever incentive rate the board would want to do. So this is really reflecting the remainder of this year and through next fiscal year, following which we'll have a new budget and rate structure, and we'd be able to fund this intentionally. Here, the additional $1 million would come out of reserves. So that's certainly a policy decision. It's just not recommended at this point, given the uncertainty of where we're going with our revenues, assuming, you know, the conditions that you discussed before that may occur does actually occur.
That's a very fair comment, Ben, and I appreciate it completely. I didn't read that into this for 2023, you know, I didn't put that piece together until you just said it, but it still may be the wrong time to take our foot off the gas. We've got people's attention now. They're thinking about it. If we take our foot off the gas, and I'm not promoting one way or the other, I agree with you completely. It needs a full discussion in the budget. I think that we need to start, as Cynthia has said routinely, we need to start thinking about this side of the operation as part of the capital program. And whether it's this year or next year, I don't care about that, other than losing momentum. So that's all I'm going to say about that, but you got the idea.
Could I make another comment?
Of course.
If it succeeded in converting 410,000 square feet, and that saves 28 gallons per square foot per your earlier slide, that's about 10 million gallons, which is about 30 acre feet a year for $1 million. That's 3,000 an acre foot, give or take.
Yep.
But it's permanent. It's permanent.
One time, yeah, one time.
It's a permanent reduction. So you're basically gaining 30 acre feet a year for three. You know, over time, it's actually a good deal as far as increasing supply. So it's just, you know, it's flipping the paradigm a little, as President Russell suggested. You know, it's like, we got to look at it that way too. I understand the budget impact, but I also think it really deserves some serious consideration, because incentives are a nice way to go rather than, you know, regulation. It's a nice way to go, and it in the long run, not in the budget cycle, but in the long run, it seems to be a good investment as far as supply increase.
All right, wrapping up with the next step. So we will continue to track the statewide actions around drought, and, you know, bring those back as changes are coming forward from the state. Based on board feedback today, which I think will continue during the rest of the discussion during this meeting, we'll determine actions for repealing emergency drought prohibitions, and then which would be added to our normal year item. As we look beyond that, right, if and when the emergency prohibitions are rolled back, then, you know, that next step would be to consider repealing the water shortage emergency as a whole and replacing that with the water conservation and water supply resolution. Staff will develop a formal proposal to amend the turf conversion program, and then finally we'll monitor participation and expenditures of the other drought incentives that staff is proposing that remain in place with no changes at this time. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to the chair.
Thank you. Well, I think we probably had enough board input at this point to satisfy my standard practice. So with that, unless I hear an objection from other members, let's go to the public comment.
Chair Russell, I actually realized that Steve Moore with Ross Valley Sanitary District is here. It's not on.
Yes,
I'm going to allow him to speak.
that's perfect.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Moore.
Good morning. This is Steve Moore. Can everybody hear me okay?
Loud and clear, Steve, and thank you for your patience.
No problem. I'm very interested in the subject matter that's being discussed today. So I'm joining you on behalf of the Ross Valley Sanitary District, which is about 1/4 of your service area in terms of population and water use. And, you know, we provide wastewater collection services to the same customers. We have the same ratepayers. Thanks very much for the opportunity to speak today and provide some input about the issue, mainly about sewer flushing. We're a little concerned about the soil compaction restriction, but I'll set that aside and talk about sewer flushing. And it could take a lot of time. I've got 7 points I want to bring to you. I was wondering, did you get my comment letter that I sent today at 7:30?
I haven't seen it.
Okay, that's too bad.
But it'll come to us. It'll come to us.
You'll get it because it was a nice kind of overview of the issues. But suffice to say, we strongly support your efforts to manage the water resources in our area, of course, and to do so cost effectively, and strongly support your efforts to promote water conservation. And so I feel like we need to slow down a little bit before making permanent certain restrictions that were experimented with this last year. And we've learned a lot, and we want to provide some meaningful input into these policy decisions. In the end, at this time, I just want to ask that you trust the sanitary districts as if we were in the same agency, and let us go on optimizing water efficiency in what are essential potable water uses. And so in that regard, I'll go over my 7 points. First, our use at 800,000 gallons a year is about 2 acre-feet a year, about 1/4 of the sewer flushing use you discussed. And I ask you to think about, like, if you have a college student and they have a $20,000 budget, because you all use 20,000 acre-feet a year, and you got to save 40%, which is $8,000. And your college student comes back to you and said, "Hey, I figured out a way to save $4." And you say, well, as a parent, you say, well, that's nice, but I need you to save 8,000. And basically that's what you do with the sewer flushing. You get the $4. And so it's not a significant effect on water supply. But my second point is that sewer cleaning is a health and safety use of potable water and is therefore essential. Non-potable water is marginally available in our surface area to perform this essential use of water. So the ordinance presumed an availability of recycled water throughout the area, and this past year's experience has shown it's not practical. Moreover, sewer cleaning equipment needs to use a mix of potable water with recycled water to maintain operability of the equipment, such that 100% recycled water use, especially non-tertiary, is not recommended for this health and safety use of water. My third point, other water districts do not prohibit sewer cleaning with potable water, except a few that operate a tertiary non-potable distribution system of purple hydrants throughout their service area. Last year in the Backwood Collection System Committee, we confirmed that you, Marin Water, were the only water district in the Bay Area that prohibited sewer cleaning. 4, we had productivity impacts. We fell behind in root cleaning, and roots grow more during drought. And I could go on and on about that story, but We had two major sewer backups, over $500,000 in damage to people's homes. And we had overflows in this year's storms as a result of falling behind on root removal. 5, we also had equipment impacts. An expensive pump with 4 to 5 year lifespan had to be replaced in 1.5 years. So it's like a 5-year pump replaced in 1.5 years using only recycled water. And we have 2 of these type of vehicles, and we're not going to use recycled water in them anymore. And it's not a huge water use. 6, CMSA is not a 24/7, 365 recycled water producer. They were down in January, and recycled water wasn't available, so all potable water was used for over a month by our district. 7, we've developed an optimized approach we'll continue to implement, which we believe should be voluntary due to the essential nature of our use. So we request respectfully that you delete the prohibition from 1M from Ordinance 449, and the other uses in this prohibition aren't significant either in terms of a water supply budget, especially soil compaction. But we really want to focus your attention on sewer flushing, which is not what we call it. We call it sewer cleaning because sewer flushing is an old way of opening up hydrants and flushing systems. Today, we're much more sophisticated with high pressure jets and doing our essential work for health and safety. And it won't constitute backsliding in any measurable sense. But I want to get the dialogue going and talk about the significant impacts that this policy has had on our district as well as other districts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. We'll take it into consideration.
Okay, we have 2 more public comments. Let me pull up the screen here. And the first speaker is, I can't find it. Okay, the first speaker is Mr. Roger Roberts. Go ahead, sir.
Hello again. A few comments that I want to share with you. One is in the first part of the presentation, Larry Bragman brought up the issue of where the triggers are for various actions to be taken. And I think that's a very valid approach, and that I think you should look more carefully at when you actually apply, if you will, the measures that are being promoted for reduction of water use. And that would apply, for instance, in golf courses and pool covers and the rest. So the triggers, I think, is a very important point, and I support Mr. Bragman on that point. Then in terms of incentives, we are going to see you go through a COSA process, I'm sure, sometime later in the year. And there's a couple of areas where you can create some incentives associated with the water rate structure itself. For example, if we really want to reduce irrigation in the summer, why do you provide in your existing water rate an increase in allowable use in the tiers? That doesn't make any sense at all. And that is something that needs to be remedied. And there's no tiering benefit for being a super saver. So you're going to have to look at the water rate structure top to bottom in terms of creating a rate structure that will incentivize, if you will, reduction and conservation of water use. And those are the comments I would like to make at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Those are excellent comments.
Thank you. The next speaker, Bonnie Bueller. Go ahead, Ms. Bueller. I've enabled your microphone permissions. Ms. Bueller? Guess. Ms. Bueller? I can't get a hold of her. I apologize.
Okay, anybody else?
No.
Okay, I think we should move on. Okay, any other comments from the board? Ben, I think we've given you a direction. If you don't feel that, let me know or let us know.
Yeah, what I think from what I heard, what I would recommend going forward on the first part of the discussion of the emergency shortage restrictions is we would come back with an ordinance with the recommendations similar to what we presented today, but structured in a way, if the general counsel thinks we could do it, where we could do some editing on the fly. So for example, we would include pool covers, just as an example, based on the conversation, but we would be able to edit that out if ultimately that's where the direction of the board landed. I'm just using that illustratively. So I'd like to proceed along those lines on that portion of the discussion today. And on the change to the turf program, we are going to touch again on finances at the upcoming finance committee meeting. And I think benefit from that discussion, we are having some rain and that kind of thing, which works well for water supply. Again, it does dampen down demand that hits us on the financial side, right? But anyway, that's where we are. And revisit that discussion at an upcoming committee meeting as well, if that works for the board.
Yeah, that sounds good.
I had a comment about that, and it slipped past me. The thing that concerns me, Ben, is I think, oh, I know what it is now. Do we need to wait for the COSA to implement that change in the water budget, or when the tiers kick in? Is that something that we can change?
Oh,
without?
yeah, the comment that, yes, well, yes, we would need a COSA and a 218 process. If we just wanted that, a separate one, which I wouldn't recommend, particularly because now we're moving forward with the COSA. There are a number of opportunities in Mr. Roberts identified, certainly a key one. So all of that will be discussed as part of the upcoming COSA and subsequent rate setting process.
Okay, I would suggest that we add something like that into the slides that were here, just to say we acknowledge it, you know, that just as one of the items. I think that one makes perfect sense. And just put in a note that says we can't do it without the COSA and the 218 notice. But that we're thinking about it.
Okay, we'll capture an upcoming water conservation discussion.
Yeah, yeah. And also in the budget side, huh?
Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Can staff find out when that was implemented? Maybe Jack knows. I just would be curious when the summer rate tiers were introduced.
No.
As long as I can remember, they've been there, Larry.
You can do some research and see if we can find the answer for you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Okay. So enough direction, Ben, and you know, maybe you and Steve Moore can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, we will. We've reached out, you know, to them, letting them know what we were going to bring to the board today, and we have gotten some comments. And I think our proposal of a phased approach may not be that different than where he was headed. So we'll continue those discussions.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems to me one thing they could do is they could go downstream to a downstream manhole and suck the water out that they put in.
Yeah, his pumps would probably have more problems with that than with the recycle, but
Well, maybe, but I mean, it could be adjusted. You could design a system that would work to just suck its own water back and recirculate it for the cleaning or the flushing or whatever you want to call it.
I do think some of it is the timing, because as he noted, this was new to the agencies. He mentioned CMSA, they may be expanding their recycled water station, and we could support it. So maybe it is more of a 24/7 operation. So I think there's some opportunities, and I think the key is not perhaps, miscalculating on the level of impacts for the benefit, but keeping moving forward in the right direction.
Yeah, and it's hard to imagine CSMA ever running out of number 2 water, but not getting access to it, I guess, could be a problem. So, maybe we need to talk to the folks there and get them cranked up to realize that they need to work with us too. Not just work with us, but connect with us, because we're telling people to do one thing and then they're telling them that they can't. So if they're going to do that kind of thing, they need to give us a little warning, and I'm sure Jason will be happy to do that.
We'll have the dialogue.
Okay. I think we're done. I assume, Terry, that Ms. Buell never linked back, or?
Yes, she can. She can speak now. Let me pull her up if I can reach her.
She can speak now? Okay, go ahead.
Ms. Bueller, can you unmute yourself, please?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it's Bonner Beeler. I'm the manager of the Homestead Valley Sanitary District. I'm sorry, I guess I was muted before, and
not a problem. Thank you for commenting.
Sure. So I would like to second Steve Moore's comments and suggest that you look at both the materials he submitted initially and the ones he just submitted. We're a relatively small district down in Southern Marin, and we rely on Roto-Rooter and their equipment for flushing, and availability of tertiary treatment in Southern Marin is effectively non-available. We use water, which is chlorinated effluent, and we have a regulatory requirement for washdown of spill sites with potable water. So if you have one truck that's filled with recycled water for sewer flushing, that has to be dumped down and refilled with potable water to comply with cleaning. So that's an issue. Our main problems are transport times and not being able to use hydrants. I talked to the Richardson Bay director, and he said it's probably a 40% increase of time. And at $3.85 an hour in an 8-hour day, that comes out to be $1,000 for using recycled water as opposed to using potable water. So it is a financial impact. And as Steve said, it was an operational impact just because of transport time. So, but since you're going to get involved with Steve and hopefully the other sanitary districts, so we'll have an opportunity to hear our suggestions. I'll take that now. I would just like to state that, Steve's a large district. We're 12.5 miles. He's 150 miles. The issues are similar. The water impact on MMWD for our impact is probably one home at 30 CCF for our savings for use of water reclamation or using reclaimed over potable. So those are the issues. You'll hear them again, and I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity to comment now.
We hear you loud and clear, and please take our thanks for hanging in there and making your comment. Okay, well, with that, I think we're done, and I'm going to adjourn the meeting.
Thanks very much, everybody.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody.
Cool.
Okay.